Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, now that you're good and comfortable in your seats, we'd like to ask and invite the veterans to make their way over to the bagpiper, and we're going to ask you to process in with the bagpipes. Please join me in a brief moment of silence. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the Washington County Fair military ceremony celebrating Vietnam veterans. As a 12-year Air Force veteran, it is my honor and privilege to be your master of ceremonies. Thank you for your service. That was Joseph Goodmanson on the bagpipes. At this time, we'd like to invite Commissioner Adam Snow to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the national anthem performed by Candace Washburn. Commissioner.
All rise and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Commissioner. And if we could give the men and women here that have served our country a round of applause, now's the time to do it. We'd like to recognize some of our elected officials, Commissioner Victor Iverson, Commissioner Gil Almquist, Commissioner Adam Snow. I don't believe we have any of the city's mayors here, if I'm correct. There's a League of Cities going on today. Also in attendance, City of St. George Chief of Police Kyle Whitehead, and is Henry Walton here? No. If you're out there and I forgot you, welcome. We'd also like to thank some of our sponsors for helping make this event possible: Coca-Cola and Gallion, Welker, and Beckstrom. Please give them all a round of applause. And please be seated. Not that you don't look good standing up. At this time, I'd like to introduce David Cordero. David is the Communications and Marketing Director for the City of St. George, as well as Chairman of the Veterans Coalition of Southern Utah. David has been a published writer for more than 20 years and always tries to do his best to convey his appreciation for our veterans, and that is the truth. After David's remarks, he will then introduce Vietnam veteran Ron Lewis. David.
Thank you, Ed. A little windy here, so I'll have to keep a hold of my script as we go. It's my sincere privilege to be here today to take just a few minutes to do something that is long overdue, which is to honor, recognize, and thank veterans of the Vietnam War for their service to our country. You know, these days, it's not uncommon to see someone thank a veteran. It happens every day in grocery stores, city parks, airports, at ball games. Those of us who have not served in the military, those of us who have not raised our right hand and sworn to protect this country, generally hold the men and women of our armed forces who do in high regard. Sadly, that hasn't always been the case. It has been said that patriots can support a war and patriots can oppose a war, but that no matter what your personal feelings are about our country's participation in a particular war, we should always support our troops. Toward the latter part of the Vietnam War, there were many Americans who went out of their way to demonstrate the opposite of support for our troops. American troops were denigrated for serving, not praised for being willing to serve. American troops were blamed for fighting in a foreign land instead of being commended for doing so with courage and valor. American troops were attacked verbally and sometimes physically when we as Americans should have had their backs, especially because American service members have always had our backs. We are now 5 and 6 decades removed from Vietnam. Time, our eternal nemesis, marches on. Time has yet to be defeated and never stands still. That is why I implore every Vietnam War veteran in attendance to consider doing one thing: tell your story. I asked that 2 years ago when we were here honoring World War II veterans. I sought that last year when we honored Korean War veterans. And today, I plead with you, our Vietnam War veterans, to tell your story. Set the record straight. Your courage needs to be celebrated. Tell us about the suffocating heat of the jungles, the helicopter evacuations, and the monsoonal rains in that faraway land. Tell us about the lifelong friends you made and how you looked after one another in country and continue to look after one another in your home country. Tell us that you fought with just as much resolve and honor as those who went before you at Gettysburg, at the Argonne Forest, at Normandy, at the Chosin Reservoir, and that your battles at Khe Sanh and Hue, the Tet Offensive, Hamburger Hill, and Rolling Thunder were just as important. And remind us that America never lost a major military battle in Vietnam. You may not consider yourselves heroes, but make no mistake, the simple act of volunteering to serve and defend our country is heroic indeed. Now I'd like for all our able-bodied Vietnam War veterans in attendance to please stand again. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in a show of gratitude and thanks. Thank you. You may be seated. It is my distinct honor to introduce our next speaker. A Navy pilot stationed on the USS Ranger, Captain Ron Lewis, did 4 tours of duty in Vietnam amid a military career that spanned 27 years. A resident of Washington City, he has continued to be involved in military affairs over the years, most notably bringing public awareness for those who remain missing in action from our past conflicts. His personal motto is, "You are not forgotten." Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ron Lewis.
Before I start my prepared remarks, I am honored to be standing here, especially among this group. If you served in Vietnam, would you please raise your hand? Thank you. I too am a veteran of that war. I completed Navy pilot training in August of 1965. Less than 4 months later, I found myself on board an American aircraft carrier steaming towards the Vietnam War. I was the junior pilot assigned to the USS Ranger's Rescue Helicopter Detachment. The massive carrier arrived on Yankee Station in late December. Yankee Station was a geographical point 50 miles from the Vietnam coastline. From that location, 3 American aircraft carriers were conducting around-the-clock combat missions over South and North Vietnam. Within hours of arriving on Yankee Station, the Rangers Air Wing began flying combat missions. It was well after midnight when our first flight of airplanes began returning from their assigned missions. It was a very, very dark night with no moon. I was flying in the co-pilot seat of the Ranger's rescue helicopter when all of a sudden we heard the ship's air boss yelling over the radio, "You're on fire! Eject! Eject!" We immediately told our rescue air crewmen to rig for rescue. At the same time, we began receiving verbal radio directions from the ship, telling us that the airplane had not crashed on the carrier flight deck. It had continued flying for several minutes before crashing into the water ahead of the ship. I and my pilot had to remain focused on the helicopter's instrument panel. We could not look out to visually search for the downed airplane. After several minutes, our air crewman reported seeing the tail fin of the downed plane ahead of us. I radioed that sighting to the ship. At that point, all incoming radio calls from the ship went silent. We were now on our own. We began receiving verbal directions to fly from our air crewman. As we slowly came to a hover directly above the airplane, our crewman said the plane was on the surface, but slowly sinking in a nose-down position. While holding a portable searchlight in his hand, he said the plane's cockpit canopy was still closed. The 2-man flight crew had not activated the canopy ejection system. Again, with his handheld searchlight, he said he could see the reflective tape on the top of both flight helmets. However, he saw no movement inside. Shortly after that, he said this, "They're gone." That was 57 years ago. I can still hear our crewman's voice. "They're gone." That was my first, but sadly, it was not my last unsuccessful rescue attempt. Now let me turn to my first successful Vietnam rescue. It was a midday flight on a clear day with unlimited visibility. I was flying in the pilot's seat, I was controlling the helicopter. We were circling the ship in our assigned helicopter holding pattern when suddenly the air boss began yelling over the radio, "Plane over the side, plane over the side." We were on the upwind leg of our assigned holding pattern. From that position, I could not see the carrier flight deck. I immediately turned around. As I passed behind the ship, I saw the plane hanging upside down from the side of the carrier. One of the plane's landing wheels had lodged in the carrier's flight deck safety railing as it went over the side of the ship. The plane hung there for several minutes before the wheel broke off. After hitting the water, the plane began to sink. I quickly came to hover directly over the now sinking plane. I hovered there for what seemed like hours. Suddenly, the pilot popped to the surface like he'd been shot out of a cannon. Our rescue crewman lowered the rescue harness to him. He slipped the harness over his head, and we safely hoisted him above the helicopter. That entire event took less than 10 minutes. A very upbeat, a very happy event, and especially happy for our now very soggy rescuee. I found out later that the pilot had received battle damage during a low-level bombing run over his Vietnam target. During his return flight to the Ranger, he had lost all of the plane's hydraulic fluid. Thus, he had no brakes when he landed. Moving on, in late August of that year, the Ranger's time on Yankee Station was coming to an end. The big ship would soon be departing Vietnam waters for the last time. We were going home. Some long 3 weeks later, the Ranger was nearing the California coastline. Unless you were on watch, most of the Ranger's 2,000-man crew were up all night playing cards or board games. As I walked around the hangar bay, I would see or hear someone strumming on a guitar while others were trying, and I do mean trying, to sing. The closer the ship got to land, more and more of the crew began moving up to the flight deck. I remember standing on the flight deck as the Ranger moved from behind a large hill near the harbor entrance. All of a sudden, the bright lights emanating from the San Francisco coastline came into view. At that point, the Ranger was still many miles from the harbor entrance. The sun was now up as we entered the harbor. It was a clear day. Then we saw it. Hanging from the center span of the Golden Gate Bridge was a gigantic Welcome Home banner. Allow me to pause here. As the Ranger passed under that beautiful Welcome Home banner, we had lost over 20 combat airplanes. More importantly, 18 of our shipmates were not coming home. 3 of them were now POW. They were prisoners of war. 7 of them were now MIA. They were missing in action somewhere in Vietnam. As the big ship passed under that beautiful Welcome Home banner, 18 Ranger families would not be standing on the pier when we arrived at the Alameda Naval Station. Moving on. After passing under the Golden Gate, we could see the shoreline was lined with hundreds of cars and people waving Welcome Home banners. Several harbor fireboats were moving along while spraying high streams of water into the air. We saw colorful rainbows emanating from the water spray. That only added to our homecoming welcome. As we approached the naval pier, we could see the pier was crowded with hundreds of people. The closer we got, we could hear a Navy band playing. We saw Welcome Home Daddy signs everywhere. That was a great homecoming. That was my first, but not my last Vietnam War homecoming. Now let me shift to a different kind of homecoming. In late 1968, I was stationed on an American Naval Air Station near Tokyo, Japan. My wife and I lived in off-base housing. One day, my commanding officer called me into his office to tell me that one of our deployed helicopters had crashed, killing everybody on board. My CO wanted me to go with him to inform the now deceased pilot's wife about her husband's death. But why me? The pilot and his wife were personal friends. We lived in the same off-base housing area. A short time later, my CO, a base chaplain, and I departed the base in an official Navy car, a highly polished black sedan. A short time later, we were standing in our dress uniforms when Tanya opened her front door. After telling Tanya that she and her 2 infant-age children would be escorted back to her home in Sarasota, Florida, Tanya turned to my CO and said this: "Can Ron take me home?" One might ask here, why am I sharing that event with you? My answer: I am not sure of the time period here, but at some point in the late 1960s, public unrest around America's involvement in the Vietnam War was bubbling up across America, and especially near military bases and at large civilian airports. Sadly, the sight of someone in a military uniform became a prime target for public demonstrations against the Vietnam War. Let me return to Tanya's "Can Ron Take Me Home?" Tanya, her 2 infant-age children, and I departed from the Tokyo International Airport for a very long flight back to her home in Florida. The doctor had given Tanya something to help her sleep during the long flight. For the next 10+ hours, I spent many hours first holding one and then the other crying baby while Tanya slept. We had a scheduled plane change at the San Francisco airport. I was traveling in my Navy lieutenant uniform. At some point, I needed to use the public restroom. We were sitting near our departure gate, which was some distance from the restrooms. As I came out of the restroom, 2 young men jumped in front of me and began yelling all kinds of profanity in my direction. The tall one was only inches from my face. I was now shaking uncontrollably as they continued yelling at me. It was like I was frozen in place. At that point, I had been without sleep for over 24 hours. Still yelling at me, the 2 young men saw 2 airport security guards approaching. They quickly turned and began running in the opposite direction, with the 2 security guards in pursuit. I did not want to tell Tanya about the event. I walked slowly around the airport corridor for several minutes before returning to my seat. I said nothing to Tanya, not then nor at any time after we arrived in Florida. When I returned to Japan some 3 weeks later, I told my commanding officer about my San Francisco airport homecoming. What did I learn from that airport encounter? Never wear my military uniform in public. Thankfully, I no longer feel that way. Between December 1965 and July 1973, a period of over 8 years, I had many Vietnam War homecomings. Many were very happy events. Some were not so happy. Today, I proudly stand here in my Navy captain uniform. To all of my fellow Vietnam veterans, I end with this. Go into any American airport, or maybe your local Walmart, while wearing a Vietnam War ball cap. See what kind of reaction you get. See how many times you hear someone say, "Thank you for your service." Have you ever heard a young boy or a young girl say that to you with a smiling parent or maybe a smiling grandparent nearby? I have. To all of my fellow Vietnam veterans, know this. Today, the vast majority of the American people will thank you for your Vietnam service. 24 days ago, on March 29th, 2022, President Biden signed a presidential proclamation. Some of those were passed out here today. I end this presentation by quoting from that presentation. I call upon all Americans to seek out and extend the nation's profound gratitude to each of our Vietnam War veterans and to their families during public ceremonies and programs throughout the country, unquote. This Washington County Fair event is just that, a public event honoring all of our Vietnam War veterans. To you, to all of you, we salute you. I salute you. Welcome home.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Thank you to all who have participated thus far, and of course to our glorious veterans and your relatives, family that are with you here today. Most of us recognize that words on paper mean a lot to read over and over. History has been continued to be written about. Today we also have words on paper in the form of a proclamation that was passed, and I'd like to read it at this time. But it goes far beyond these words in our sentiment, our sincere devotion to country, to God, and to those who protect it. So please understand that as commissioners, as a county and a grateful citizenry, that those things spoken of thus far and written upon this proclamation go far beyond the words on a page. Proclamation number 2022-21, a proclamation declaring April 21st, 2021, Vietnam War Veterans Day. Whereas during the Vietnam War, which spanned from February 1961 to May 1975. More than 9 million Americans served in the military, including nearly 2.7 million in theater. And whereas the Americans who fought in Vietnam displayed courage, fortitude, and honor in often horrendous conditions and paid a substantial price with more than 58,000 dead, 153,000 wounded, 2,500 prisoners of war, and approximately 1,600 Americans unaccounted for. And whereas powerful emotions and recollections of combat in the Vietnam War and its aftermath have persisted for years after the war, and that for many, an unseen battle continues. And whereas the veterans of the Vietnam War were sometimes subjected to disrespect by their countrymen, as a nation we now know better and therefore do better and convey abiding support and respect to the brave men and women who served. And now, therefore, be it resolved, do hereby proclaim Thursday, April 21st, 2022, as Vietnam War Veterans Day in Washington County, in tribute to Vietnam War veterans, those with us here on earth, an estimated 2,500 surviving Vietnam veterans in Washington County alone, and those we honor in spirit. We extend our arms and say, welcome home. We urge all citizens to join us in honoring you and expressing gratitude for your service. Thank you.
To recognize each of you who are in attendance with us today, I'd like to read the names of those brave veterans who are with us right now. Neil Bennett, Tim Carey, Rudolph Cooley, Anthony Damiano, Art Davis, Randall Bruce Dawes, Dennis Dubkowski, Corey Ferguson, Frank L. Ferguson Jr., Keith Gubler, Timothy Isett, Gary Cole, Pat Lisi, Charles Martin, John Jack Moran, William Perlis, Jerry Randall, Charles Mike Shannon, Wilford G. Stay, George A. Strutzel Jr., Daniel Chester Tanis, Roland Clifford Turnbow, Joseph E. Wimple, Dennis M. Wilson, Wallace Winford, James O. Winkler, Vernon Denman, Scott Gehrig, Chris Bandley, Larry Moran, Terry Doon, Daniel McGuire, David Beck, Karen Foss, Marty Bigby, Floyd Smith, John Bullard, Rudolph Laus, Dale Bunker, James Averett, Daryl Nakai, Danny Greathouse, Richard Wilson, Alan Miles, Peter J. Drader, Harley Navis, Bob Pagani, and David Beck. Thank you very much for your attendance today.
Veterans, family members, thank you for being here today. I was thinking as you were walking in, as the veterans were coming in, you know, the English language really doesn't have words to express appreciation fully to those who gave up so much in a certain part of their time to defend the freedom for all of us. So a simple thank you is what I offer, but I know that it's not enough. As the youngest son of a father who served in the South Pacific in World War II, I was born during the Vietnam War. I grew up in the peace that was secured by your sacrifice. As veterans, you accomplished every objective that were given you. Your bravery and sacrifice stopped the advancement of tyranny and secured peace for millions and millions of souls inside and outside of this country. The Military Times says, as has been commented, that 3 million served in country and another 6 million served elsewhere. All were called to serve. None were self-determined where they served. And 2.7 million served in country, and each deserves our thanks. I was looking at the numbers in comparison. The Revolutionary War, 231,000 served. In the Mexican-American War, 150,000. In the Spanish-American War, 250,000. In the Civil War, on both sides, only 2.75 million served. In World War I, 4.7 million served. Of course, World War II, 16 million served, and in Korea, 6.8, and in Iraq, 1 million. So 9 million men and women called into service during the Vietnam War. Thank you, all of you. You know, as I was reflecting on what to say, the words of Thomas Paine and his pamphlet, The Crisis, that basically brought America together in that dark time of our founding, rang to me and I believe speaks to you and to your service. In the beginning of that pamphlet, it says, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered, and yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put the proper price on its goods." And I was thinking about that. Today, you veterans, there are no summer soldiers or sunshine patriots. None of you shrunk from this crisis. All of you stood when you were called, and you deserve our thanks. And it is through you that we are able to, you secured freedom not only for those that you fought for, but for all of us. And so for somebody that grew up in the 80s, somebody who was acquainted with the Vietnam War by watching Rambo and Platoon and all of those movies that didn't properly depict it, but thank you for your service. Thank you for that time that you gave for our country. And this is just a wonderful time. Every fair that we've done this now, it's just been my favorite part of the fair. So thank you so much. And I understand that our cakes are running just a little bit late, as Susie has told me, but we do have the plaques and other things in the back. And we just want to thank you and for your service to our country. And thank you for being citizens of Washington County. We appreciate you so much.